All right. Well, hello. My name is Christopher Scott, and I serve as a small groups pastor at a local church. And in this video, I'm going to give you a training on how to use the Insight for Living Bible Study Guide for the Book of Revelation, produced by Chuck Swindoll and Insight for Living. So there's a series of 3 books on the Book of Revelation. This is book 1 that I'm doing this video for one of our small group studies. For one of our men's groups that's going to be doing this study. So in this video, I'm going to talk to you about how do you prepare to facilitate a small group Bible study? How do you prepare to facilitate a small group discussion? I'm going to talk to you about how you want to format your group meeting. So what elements do you want to have in your group? Then I'm going to give you some basic tips for facilitating a small group study in general. A couple tips related, to this study specifically. And then a couple of tips related more general to any type of Bible study. And then lastly, I'm going to give you a brief introduction to the book of Revelation. So let's go ahead and get started. So how do you want to prepare to facilitate your small group study? So you're the facilitator. You're in charge of guiding a discussion and leading people and helping to disciple people. How do you want to prepare to do that? Well, the first thing you want to do is pray. You want to pray for the things you're going to study in your group. You want to pray for the people in your group. Pray that God will work in their hearts, soften their hearts, help them learn and grow, and help them to apply what they are learning. So that's the first thing you want to do as you prepare for your small group, is just simply to pray for your group each and every day. Then you want to read through the passage a few times and get a feel for the passage and the big idea for the passage on your own, right? So let's say lesson 6 here is Revelation chapter 2, verses 12 through 17. Okay, so there's really only 5 or 6 verses there. So you want to, part of your preparation time is just to read those 5 or 6 verses a few times. Read it over. Read it when you get up in the morning. Read it on your lunch break at work. Maybe read it at night just before you go to bed. Just read it and try to get a feel for what's the big idea of this passage, what's going on, what's being said, things like that. Then you want to read a good commentary on the passage that you're going to be covering in your lesson, or read some good study Bible notes, right? So a really good commentary I recommend is the Be Victorious commentary by Warren Wiersbe. I'll put a link down there in the description for this. It's a great commentary on the book of Revelation, and the links I'm going to talk about that I put in the descriptions are affiliate links to Amazon. So if you do purchase something from Amazon, I do get a small commission, just to let you know. But you want to read a good commentary. John Walvoord also has a great commentary on the book of Revelation, I believe published by Moody. I'll put that down there as well. Or this commentary by Warren Wiersbe, Be Victorious, is really good too. So that's the third thing you want to do, is you want to read a good commentary about the passage, or read some good study notes and a good study Bible. And I got some links to some study Bibles I recommend down below too. Then last thing you want to do is you want to work through the lesson on your own and answer the questions before the group. Try to answer the questions. Write out your thoughts and opinions, and don't worry about correct grammar, making everything sound good. Just get your thoughts down on paper so that when you show up to facilitate the group, you're ready to facilitate the group because you already know what you think about the questions, and you can more readily kind of take deviations and go there. So that's how you want to prepare for your small group. First thing you want to do is pray. Second thing you want to do is read the passage a few times. Third thing you want to do is you want to study the passage with a good commentary or some good study notes and a study Bible. And then fourth, you want to answer the questions and write them out and come prepared to talk about the group. So that's how you want to prepare for your small group. Now I want to talk to you about how you format your small group meeting. What are the necessary elements you want to have as part of your small group meeting, okay? And there's 3 main elements we want the small groups at our church to have in their group each and every week, and that they do in order each and every week. There's 3 elements to do in order each week. And then there's 2 additional elements you can do either at the beginning or the end of the group. It's up to you. But those 3 main elements are the unifying question, reading the biblical passage, and then going through the questions together as a group, right? So let me talk about each of these 3. One is doing the unifying question. That's where we encourage the groups to start out their group by asking, what did you all take away from the message at church over the weekend? What did you learn? What stood out to you? What made a difference? Things like that. And we do the unifying question for a few reasons. Number 1, we want small groups to complement people attending worship over the weekend, not replace them attending worship, right? So we never want small groups to replace people being a part of church on the weekend. We want them to complement what's already going on at church, right? Because small groups are great, and if it's a good, healthy small group, people like each other, they enjoy the group, and they can start to feel like, I don't need to go to church. I'm part of my group. This is my church. Well, that's good too, but we want everybody to be together worshiping God through music, listening to some really good Bible teaching, enjoying fellowship, serving in the nursery or kids ministry or cleaning toilets, whatever that might be, greeting and loving on new people that come to church and accepting them. So we never want small groups to replace people attending church over the weekend. So that's the first reason we ask the unifying question, as it just reminds people there's good stuff happening at church over the weekend. You want to be a part of it, right? So that's the first reason. The second reason we want to do the unifying question is it helps people remember what they learned in the message over the weekend. So if your group meets on a Wednesday night, it's really easy that by Wednesday people have already forgotten what they learned on Sunday. So asking the unifying question reminds people of what they learned at church. And then the third reason we ask the unifying question is usually a good sermon will have some practical applications that people need to be doing based on what they learned and what they heard. And the unifying question helps to remind people to do those practical applications in their lives. Okay, so that's the first thing you want to do is the unifying question. Second thing you want to do is simply read the passage in your group, right? So I mentioned lesson 6 in this guide is Revelation chapter 2, verses 12 through 17. It's only 6 verses. It's pretty quick, pretty easy. So in your group, if you know somebody in your group likes to read scripture, call on that person to read. If it's a brand new group and you're not really sure who likes to read or who does read well, don't call on anybody. You as the facilitator do it. But if you've been going a while and you kind of know who likes to read, ask somebody to read it, okay? And then the third thing you want to do is work through the lesson, right? Just go ahead and go through the questions, question by question, take your time, keep the group on focused, and keep going through it, okay? And then, so those are the 3 elements each small group should do in order each week. The unifying question, read the passage out loud to each other, and then work through the questions. Then there's 2 additional elements you can do at the beginning or end of your group. One is to have some prayer time, and I'm going to put a link up there about how to organize prayer time in your group. And as a facilitator, this doesn't even have to be you that organizes prayer time. You can assign that to somebody else to do the prayer time. So that's something else you want to do in your group, prayer time. And another one is to have time for snacks. And again, as the facilitator, you don't even have to organize that. You can put someone else in the group in charge of organizing a snack list, getting people signed up, sending reminders, and I'll put another link to another video over there about how you do a snack sign-up list for your groups. Okay? So that's how you want to format your small group meetings. Start with unifying question, read the biblical passage out loud so everyone can hear it, and then work through the discussion guide. And then 2 additional elements are snacks and prayer time you can do at the beginning or end. Doesn't really matter. You just want to be consistent in the process you follow each and every week, okay? So that's how you prepare to facilitate your small group. That's how you format your small group. Now I want to give you some specific tips about how you facilitate a small group discussion, specifically related to these Insight for Living Bible companions on this one on Revelation, okay? So it's good when you're doing these guides. First thing I want to mention is, as much as possible, encourage the group to work through the lesson on their own before coming to group, right? So for mine, I have some stuff highlighted in here. Encourage them to work through it, highlight stuff, write, because if they do that on their own in their own quiet time before coming to group, they're going to get a lot more out of the lesson, learn and grow a lot more, right? So you're going to have better discussions. Those discussions are going to stay more on topic if people take time on their own to work through the lesson before coming to the group, okay? So that's one thing. And don't be legalistic, say who did their homework and embarrass the people that didn't. Just if you see someone and they got their their workbook and you can see writing in it, compliment them or tell them, I appreciate you spending some time thinking about this and coming ready to share, right? So that's something, especially with the book of Revelation, because it's complex. There's a lot of metaphors, symbols, literary devices. It can get pretty difficult. So if there's any book of the Bible people need to spend some time working through before coming to the group, it's the book of Revelation, okay? So that's what you want to do there, is encourage the group to work through the lesson before coming to the group as much as possible. Now, these Bible companions by Insight for Living are formatted a specific way, right? The lesson organization starts with what's called the heart of the matter, right? That's the first section, the heart of the matter, and that's just kind of the big idea of that passage. It's the big idea of that lesson, and it kind of boils everything down to that basic idea. That's the heart of the matter. Then these studies on Revelation have an additional element that's not in most of the Bible companions that Insight for Living produces. It's called "You Are Here." Okay? You are here, and this section gives you some thought-provoking questions to orient the reader to the topic or passage, right? It just kind of gets them going and gets them thinking, where are we? Now the next section is the biggest section. It's called Discovering the Way. This section is where most of the time of the group will be spent. In this area, the group will make some basic observations about the text, interpret what it means, and correlate it with other scripture in the Bible, okay? Then the last section is starting the journey. This section helps participants decide how they're going to apply what they are learning, right? So you're kind of getting a feel. They get you started, they get you in the text, and then they get you applying the text. That's kind of the basic framework that goes on there. And there's 3 additional little elements kind of embedded within those sections that you can do in your group as well. You don't have to, but I recommend you do. One is called Getting to the Root. This section provides commentary on the Hebrew or Greek words in the Bible, right? So that's getting to the root. It's some Hebrew and Greek word studies you can do in your group. Another one is Digging Deeper. This section provides some deeper theological reading and insight. So digging deeper. And then Doorway to History, we'll talk about maybe how that passage has been interpreted over the centuries or give some historical application to what is going on there, okay? So that's the different sections of these Insight for Living Bible Companions. So now I want to give you some other basic tips about how to facilitate a small group studies. I've shared this in some of the other videos, but they're really good tips to know and follow when you facilitate a small group discussion on the Bible, right? One tip is to facilitate the discussion in light of the main message of the book of the Bible, right? So facilitate each discussion and each question in light of the main message of the book of the Bible, right? So Chuck Swindoll talks about how the key theme and main message of the book of Revelation is Christ's future triumph over the forces of evil and his recreation of the world for the redeemed. Christ's future triumph over the forces of evil is kind of the big idea. So there's going to be a lot of specific questions. What does this mean? What does this mean? What does this mean? How does this relate? And if you're struggling with something, bring it back to that big idea. So how does this relate to Christ triumphing over the forces of evil, right? So the big idea, the message just kind of orients you, and then you ask the questions in light of that main message, right? And it'll help kind of keep your group on topic, and it might help you think, that question, maybe there's a question in here, not sure what it means, not really sure how it relates to the main message. Let's just move on, right? So you want to facilitate your discussion and those questions in light of the main message of the book of the Bible. And you want to try to pace your study. That's another tip I have for you. Let me get a little coffee here. You want to try to pace your study, right? So I like to try to have a plan for how many questions our group is going to cover each week. That's one way to go about it. You say we're going to cover these amount of questions this week or this lesson this week. Or you can just start the group off. You answer as many questions as you can within the time limit, and then you stop. And that's another way to do it. Either way, just be consistent in what you do and make sure you give people plenty of time to talk and make sure that they spend some time working through the lesson and get to share what they want to share, but also by staying on topic, okay? So that's another thing you want to do is to try to pace your study, have a little bit of a plan, and stick to it the best you can and be consistent in what you do. And it's good to remember that you facilitate this, right? So these guides are meant to be a discussion, right? A facilitator discussion. I have a video up there about the 25% rule for facilitators, which means you should never ever talk more than 25% of the time, right? And if anything, the larger your group gets, the smaller that percentage should be, right? So if there's 4 guys in your group, you should be talking 25% of the time or less. If there's 6 guys, it should be more like 20%. If there's 10, it should be more like 10%, things like that. So your goal is to get everybody else talking about the questions, talking about the Bible passage, and figuring out how they're going to apply it to their lives, right? So facilitate, don't teach is another tip there. Another tip is application is more important than completion, right? Application is more important than completion. What do I mean by that? Application of what you're reading in here and talking about is more important than completing the lesson, if that makes sense, right? So always be trying to focus on, it's easy as a group. Sometimes you get in the lesson, you get talking, you kind of get stalled on a few questions. You spend too much time on this question, you get a little off topic on that question. And then before you know it, time's up and you haven't come to the last section, which is starting the journey. And that's the most important section because it's where people start to apply what they are learning. They start to talk about how they're going to apply what they're learning, right? And that's what the whole lesson about. That's how everything is directed towards, is starting the journey. So application of what you're reading and talking about is more important than just completing the lesson. That's not, as small groups, we don't just do the groups, say we studied this book, we studied that book, no, your goal is to be applying the things you're learning to your life and making your life look more like Jesus Christ and how he wants you to live, okay? So application is more important than completion when you're doing this study. Another tip is to follow up on past applications that people have said. So maybe the guys are working through the group and they're working through the lesson, and then they, some guy says, based on what we talked about, I need to have this conversation with my brother and apologize for this thing that I did, right? So as a facilitator, you need to make a mental note of that, or write it in your Bible study guide. And then next week in the group, casually mention, hey John, you said you're going to talk to your brother Steve about this. I was praying for you this week. How did that go, right? And you're being kind, you're being gentle, but you're holding people accountable to applying what they're learning to their lives. And when they say they're going to apply something or make a change, you're holding them accountable in a gentle, kind, and loving way, okay? So that's another tip there, is follow up on past commitments that people make for application, okay? And then lastly, providing the study guides and collecting money. Our church asks for $10 to cover the cost of these Bible study guides. The church doesn't make a lot of money on that. It just helps to cover the cost. And if some guys, you give out books to all the people in your group, and then they give you $10, and then 2 weeks later, a guy shows up without a Bible study guide because he forgot it at home and he came straight from work, something like that. You can loan a guide to that guy, but make sure you give it back. Don't just keep giving study guides over and over and over, because this should be something that they do and they work in and keep and hold on to, and that means something to them. So, and again, to try to encourage people to work through the lesson and bring it each week and talk about it and work through it on their own, okay? So that's just some basic facilitator tips. So we've talked about how you want to prepare for your small group. We've talked about how to format your small group. We've talked about some general tips about facilitating a small group discussion. Now I want to talk to you about a brief introduction to the book of Revelation. This is a complex book. It's a difficult book to study, so I want to talk to you about it first here and give you a broad overview of the book as I grab something here I wanted to show you before we talk about it. So the book of Revelation is the 66th book in the Bible. There's 66 books in the Bible. It's the last book in our Bible, which means there's 65 other books that all talk about things that are going to happen in the book of Revelation. So if you haven't already studied the book of Daniel, I recommend you study the book of Daniel. It's a series of 2 books produced by Insight for Living. I'll put the links down there in the description. So in other words, don't study Revelation until you've studied Daniel, okay? And it doesn't have to be a Insight for Living study, it doesn't matter. But if you spend some time working through the book of Daniel first in your group, and then Revelation, it's going to make it a lot better and go a lot smoother. So with that said, let me give you a brief introduction to the book of Revelation. So as an introduction, I'm going to talk about 6 different areas. I'm going to talk to you about the author of the book, the audience that he was writing to, the date the book was written. I'm going to give you an outline of the book, key verses, and a key theme of the book, which I already gave you briefly. So the author of the book of Revelation is John, right? John, who was one of the 12 disciples of Jesus Christ and who was one of the apostles of the first century church, right? So John wrote the book of Revelation. It's the same John that wrote the Gospel of John, same John that wrote 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, okay? So same guy wrote all 5 of those books. So he wrote the Gospel of John, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and the book of Revelation. And we know that because John is specifically mentioned in Revelation chapter 1, verses 1, 4, and 9. In 3 verses, he's specifically mentioned as John. And we know from early church history, early people around that time or shortly after John lived, that this was John the disciple. They tell us that, right? So that's how we know. So that's the author of the book of Revelation. Now let me talk to you about the audience. So John was writing to the 7 churches in Asia Minor, which is now kind of modern day Turkey, right in that area. So it was Asia Minor, modern day Turkey, Europe. It's not Asia like China, those areas. It's Asia Minor, they called back then, which is modern day Turkey. And he wrote to these 7 churches that were connected by a well-traveled mail route, right? They called it the Romans Road sometimes. You could easily get there. There was a lot of people that walked along there and traveled. It was well-connected series of 7 cities, right? And these 7 cities are Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. And all of these cities are now completely decimated and in ruins. No one lives there except for Smyrna still has people that lives there. So that's who he's writing to, are these 7 churches in Asia Minor. And he's writing from, let's talk about that under the date. So let's talk about the date next, right? So the date that the book of Revelation was written was in 95 AD, right? 95 AD. And to give you some context, Jesus likely was crucified and killed in about 30 to 36 AD, somewhere in there. Scholars differ those 6 years, but 30 to 36 AD is where Jesus was crucified and killed, 30 to 36 AD. The Apostle Paul was killed in about 65 AD, right? So about 30 years after Jesus. And the Apostle John wrote the book of Revelation in 95 AD. So about 30 years after Paul was killed, 60 years after Jesus was killed, okay? And this is important because the book of Revelation was the last book of the Bible written, 95 AD. And I'm pushing the date pretty hard. And we know that date because a guy named Irenaeus tells us that John was exiled to the island of Patmos, and it was a well-populated island. It wasn't like a deserted island, Gilligan's Island, no one else is there. And no, it's like it was a well-populated island. A lot of people lived there. There was things to eat, people there, things like that. So we know that John was exiled to the island of Patmos under Emperor Domitian, right? And we know that based on a guy named Irenaeus, which wrote a lot of books and a lot of letters in the 2nd century. And Irenaeus tells us that the Apostle John wrote the book of Revelation while exiled to the island of Patmos near the end of Emperor Domitian's reign, right? That's what Irenaeus says in his book Against Heresies. He specifically says John was on the island of Patmos writing the book of Revelation towards the end of the reign of Emperor Domitian. And the Emperor Domitian ended his reign in 95, 96 AD, somewhere in there. And so that's why we believe the book of Revelation was written then. And we know this is on good authority because Irenaeus was a disciple of a guy named Polycarp, and Polycarp was a disciple of a guy named John. Okay? And that John, that Polycarp was a disciple of, is the apostle disciple of Jesus, John, right? So John wrote the book of Revelation and told Polycarp. Polycarp then told Irenaeus. So we got it within 1 or 2 generations there about when the book of Revelation was written. And I'm pushing the 95 date pretty hard because there's a lot of people in our culture that talk about how the book of Revelation was written in 65 AD and gives prophecies about things that have already happened in the world, such as the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD and a bunch of other things, and emperors and Rome, right? And so I pushed the 95 date really hard, and how we know that for certain, because if the book was written in 95 AD, it can't be writing about prophecies that happened in 70 AD, if that makes sense. But there's people in America today, like R.C. Sproul or Jeff Durbin, that say the book of Revelation was written in 65 AD under Emperor Nero, which is completely different than what Irenaeus tells us, and that these prophecies give details about events that have already happened. And so it's kind of history, right? And that's not true from what we know from history, right? And no one's really believed that 65 date for 1,000 years until 1,000 years later after John wrote the book, people started to believe that and popularize it. So that's a lot of information. I'll put a link down there to a link on a blog post where I go in depth on this even more, okay? So that's the date of the book of Revelation. The book was written in 95 AD and is giving prophecies about things happening in the future. Now, an outline that I really like that Chuck Swindoll gives in this Bible study guide is an outline. It's really simple. He breaks it down into 3 sections. And each of the 3 sections is a Bible companion study guide, right? So each section is a guide. So this one is the heavenly stage. That's chapters 1 through 5. Revelation chapters 1 through 5, the heavenly stage. Then there's the earth drama, Revelation chapters 6 through 13. The earth drama. Then there's the final curtain, Revelation 14 through 22, the final curtain, right? And so that's each of these lessons. The heavenly stage is 12 lessons in the Bible study guide. The earthly drama is 13 lessons in the Bible study guide. And the final curtain is 15 lessons in the Bible study guide. So you're going to cover, what is that? 25, 30, 40 weeks of material, 40 lessons. If you do one lesson a week, it's going to take you a whole year. It's pretty tough to get through a whole lesson each week, okay? A key verse that Chuck Swindoll gives in the Bible study guide is he has a few key verses in the book. Revelation 1:7 says, "Look, here comes with the clouds of heaven, and everyone will see him, and even those who pierced him, and all the nations of the world will mourn for him. Yes, amen." So this is about Jesus coming back in the future. Then chapter 1, verse 19 is another key verse that Swindoll gives, and this provides the outline for the book. Jesus tells John, "Write down what you have seen, both the things that are now happening and the things that will happen," right? And the things that are now happening are Revelation chapters 2 and 3, the time of the church, and even maybe chapters 4 and 5, if you include that. And then the things that will happen in the future, that's Revelation chapters 6 through 22, right? 6 through 22 are all future. Okay, and then another couple key verses that he has is Revelation chapter 22, verses 12 through 13, which is where Jesus says, "Look, I am coming soon, bringing my reward with me to repay all people according to their deeds. And I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the end, the beginning and the end." Okay? And so those are the key verses of the book. Chapter 1, verses 7 and 19. Chapter 22, verses 12 and 13 are the key verses to the book and summarize the main message. The key theme, which I already mentioned, is Christ's future triumph over the forces of evil and his recreation of the world for the redeemed. So I know this is a little longer video, but I really want to help you as a small group facilitator prepare to lead people through the book of Revelation using this Insight for Living Bible Companion. It's a great companion, good resource. I recommend it. I would love to hear from you if you've done any of these studies. Maybe you have a comment down there you want to share to help other people. Would love to hear from you and get some feedback from you, and so you can help other people as well. And I pray that this study will help people in your group to grow and learn about Jesus Christ and future prophecies, and to help them live like Christ and grow in their spiritual walk. If you found this video helpful, you can subscribe up there and get updates on future videos. I got links how to use the Bible Companion for Daniel. I'll put up there. And then if you want to get some other small group facilitator tips, maybe you're getting a new group started, I got some videos over there that will help you get a brand new group started. And then I got some videos over there about how to facilitate a small group. Thanks for watching, and I hope to catch you again soon on another video.